19. Injustice as robbery. Injustice by courts and judges is a major form of robbery in much of history. The thieves that men must deal with are all too often on both sides of the bench. The law declares, "And thou shalt take no gift, for the gift blindeth the wise and perverteth the words of the righteous." Exodus chapter 23, verse 8. Ye shall do no unrighteousness in judgment. Thou shalt not respect the person of the poor, nor honour the person of the mighty, but in righteousness shalt thou judge thy neighbour. Leviticus chapter 19, verse 15. Thou shalt not wrest judgment. Thou shalt not respect persons, neither take a gift. For a gift doth blind the eyes of the wise, and pervert the words of the righteous. That which is altogether just shalt thou follow, that thou mayest live, and inherit the land which the Lord thy God giveth thee. Deuteronomy chapter 16, verses 19 to 20. Calvin's comment on these laws is very much to the point. This kind of theft is the worst of all, when judges are corrupted either by bribes or by affection, and thus ruin the fortunes which they ought to protect. For since their tribunal is, as it were, a sacred asylum, to which those who are unjustly oppressed may fly, nothing can be more unseemly than that they should there fall among robbers. Judges are appointed to repress all wrongs and offences. If, therefore, they show favour to the wicked, they are harbourers of thieves, than which there is no more deadly pest. And besides, since their authority excludes every other remedy, they are themselves like robbers with arms in their hands. The greater, therefore, their power of injury is, and the greater the damage committed by their unjust sentences, the more diligently are they to be aware of iniquity, and thus it was necessary to keep them in the path of duty by special instructions, lest they should conceal and encourage thievery by their patronage. Now, as avarice is the root of all evils, when it thus lays hold of the mind of judges, no integrity can continue to exist. The judge must not favour either the rich or the poor. In Exodus chapter 23, verses 3 and 6, the judge is forbidden to countenance a poor man in his cause, or to wrest the judgment of the poor in his cause. Luther, in his comment on Deuteronomy chapter 16, verses 18 to 20, observed, "Moreover, he lays down this rule to these judges and officers. They are to judge justly, that is, according to the law of God, and not according to their own understanding." Then he forbids corrupt feelings. They are not to leave the law behind and be led and motivated by the consideration of persons and bribes. These two things tend to distort and misdirect all justice, and therefore he here adds this aphorism: "Bribes blind the eyes of the wise and subvert the cause of the righteous." Verse 19. Partiality towards persons includes such things as these: fear of persons great, mighty, or wealthy, love of relatives, regard for friends, contempt for the lowly, sympathy toward those stricken by calamity, and fear of peril to one's own life, reputation, and property. Quote, bribes, end quote, however, include gain, advantage, ambition, and the insatiable and boundless gulf of greed. Therefore, in Exodus chapter 18, verse 21, Jethro advises Moses to choose men who are without greed, that is, birds that are as rare as a black swan. There is a point of especial importance in these laws. Where bribery is involved, the offence is the judge's, not the briber's. The word for bribe or bribery is, in Hebrew, kofar, redemption. The reference, thus, is to a payment for redemption. The judge who accepts a bribe is granting a false or undeserved redemption or salvation to a man who should be judged. As we have seen, a 1969 report indicated that bribery by the Cosa Nostra of public officials in the United States is $2 billion a year. The crimes of this criminal syndicate are real and many and require judgment. But with respect to bribery, the offence in terms of biblical law is not theirs, but the judge's. In every social order there will be some lawbreakers. No perfect society is possible this side of heaven. In no social order, therefore, will judges be free from temptation, if not to bribery, then at least to favoritism. The sin of bribery is thus cited in Scripture as the offence, not of the giver, but of the taker. By taking a bribe, the public official or judge thereby makes a thief of himself and a thieves' domain of his office. The most deadly and dangerous thieves are those who operate within the law, and especially as the officers of the law. As Calvin rightly saw, this kind of theft is the worst of all. The whole social order is then converted into an instrument of evil. According to Exodus chapter 23, verse 8, a bribe blinds the wise judge, but it is a one-sided blinding. That is, it blinds him to justice. The requirements of Deuteronomy chapter 16, verse 19, "Thou shalt not respect persons," is in Hebrew literally, "Thou shalt not recognize faces." The judge thus must be blind to the persons in the case and must see the issues involved. The bribe exactly reverses this. The judge is then blind to the issues and sees only the persons. Since the judge or civil officer must continually deal with evil and commonly faces some lawbreaker in matters brought before him, the reality of attempts to blind justice is always before him. It is a condition of his office. The offence, therefore, is his offence. It is a demonstration of the fact that he is on the wrong side of the bench, sitting as a judge rather than facing arraignment as a lawbreaker. The Golden Rule is often cited, and properly so, as a summation of the law. Therefore, all things whatsoever ye would that men should do to you, do ye even so to them. For this is the law and the prophets. Matthew chapter 7, verse 12. To observe the law in relation to our neighbour, recognizing his right to life, home, property and reputation, is to love him, and to do him as we would have others do unto us. Not only is this a fundamental principle of Scripture, but its reverse is equally fundamental. As Obadiah stated it, "As thou hast done, it shall be done unto thee. Thy reward shall return upon thine own head." Obadiah verse 15. Compare Judges chapter 1 verse 7, Psalm 137 verse 8, Ezekiel chapter 35 verse 15, Joel chapter 3 verses 7 to 8. What have corrupt judges done, and what is their penalty? Josephus reported on the penalty. If any judge takes bribes, his punishment is death. He that overlooks one that offers him a petition, and this when he is able to relieve him, he is a guilty person. Why this penalty? If a judge accepts a $50 bribe, why should he die for it, and the bribe giver suffer no penalty? The point at issue is more than $50. It is the life of the society. Is the society dedicated to furthering justice in terms of God's law order, or is it a thieves' order and court? Every corrupt official of states, and especially the judge, is guilty of using his office to destroy the foundations of social order, to kill godly society, and to replace it with a society of polite and legal thieves and murderers. Hence the principle inherent in the Golden Rule, "As thou hast done, it shall be done unto thee," requires his death. First and last, the major form of treason to any civil order is to destroy it as a representative of justice. Injustice, therefore, is not only robbery, but murder. It robs individuals and murders the social order. In the King James Version, we read that the bribe perverteth the words of the righteous. Exodus chapter 23, verse 8, Deuteronomy chapter 16, verse 19. The Torah renders this, that bribes upset the pleas of the just. The Berkeley version of Exodus chapter 23, verse 8 reads that a bribe or present thwarts a just man's testimony, or subverts the cause of the innocent. Deuteronomy chapter 16, verse 19. The bribe blinds the judge's eyes to the issues of justice and closes his ears to its pleas. The essence of a just order in court is that the cry for justice be heard. All the procedural care of a court of law has as its function to sift out truth from error and perjury, and to listen with sensitivity and care for the truth. The bribe, thus, destroys the basic communication required to maintain a law order. To receive a bribe is as serious, therefore, as to cut off a man's hair. Just as the man strangles without air, so the social order dies without justice. Calvin was right. This kind of theft is the worst of all. It is also, perhaps, the most prevalent. An important point with respect to this law is that it is civil law. The impersonality required of the civil courts is markedly different from the personalism of decisions in other realms. In the family, judgments can be more lenient and more severe, depending upon the situation. The family must live with the offending member. It may be more severe if it feels he is hopeless, or more lenient if it feels the offender has learned his lesson. In the church, because believers are members of one another, the same is true. They are not to resort to the impersonality of the civil courts unless the member refuses to accept the church's discipline. In that case, he is a heathen and a publican and is dealt with impersonally. Matthew chapter 18, verse 17. Family and church justice is personal and, in a sense, partial, respecting persons, although still just. In the States, where persons of varying backgrounds confront one another, impersonality and impartiality must be the rule of justice. Family and ecclesiastical justice, being personal, can be concerned with rehabilitation. Civil justice must be tied to restitution only, the principle of justice. Where the state assumes a parental rule or a pastoral rule, it not only usurps the jurisdictions of family and church, but also forsakes the impersonal justice it must administer. The state then becomes a class agency or an instrument of a race or some dominant group. If it substitutes rehabilitation or punishment for restitution, it penalizes the injured party in favor of the criminal. Within the family, an impersonal justice is fatal. For husband and wife to deal with one another impersonally is to destroy their relationship, which must be one of justice, surely, but also of mutual forbearance. Every area of personal relationships is similar. But traffic laws cannot be personal, and marital laws cannot be impersonal. When ecclesiastical discipline becomes impersonal, it means practically excommunication. The counsel to Christians to avoid the courts against one another, 1 Corinthians chapter 6, verses 1 to 10, in part presupposes this requirement of justice tempered with forbearance in personal relationships.